For a long time, forgiveness has been sold to us as the highest form of healing, not as an option, not as a possibility, but as a moral finish line. You're hurt, something unfair happens, someone crosses a line, and the solution offered almost immediately is, you need to forgive. And on the surface, that sounds wise, peaceful, mature. But let's be honest for a moment. How many times have you forgiven someone and still felt the weight? You said the words, you meant them, at least intellectually. You tried to move on, and yet something stayed. A tightness in your chest, a sudden shift in your mood when their name came up, a quiet bitterness that surprised even you. That's where the forgiveness fallacy begins. Because what we call forgiveness today is often emotional bypassing dressed up as virtue. It asks you to override your nervous system with an idea, to tell your body, this doesn't matter anymore, even when your body is still responding as if it does. And here's the uncomfortable truth no one wants to say out loud. Forgiveness does not automatically dissolve emotional bonds. You can forgive someone and still be energetically entangled with what happened. Why? Because most wounds are not just cognitive. They are somatic. They live in the body. They live in pattern. They live in how you brace yourself, how you anticipate harm, how you protect. So when forgiveness is rushed or worse, demanded, it creates an internal split. On the surface, you're the healed version of yourself. Underneath, the wound is still active. And that split costs energy. A lot of it. There's also a cultural pressure at play here that we don't talk about enough. Society loves forgiveness because it's convenient. It restores order without requiring accountability. It keeps things polite. It prevents discomfort. If you forgive quickly, the tension dissolves for everyone else. But notice something. The person who is most pressured to forgive is usually the one who was harmed. You're expected to be gracious, to resentful, to not make things awkward. And if you don't, you're labeled as bitter, difficult, stuck in the past. So many people don't forgive because they're ready. They forgive because they're tired of being judged. And that's not healing, that's compliance. Another problem with traditional forgiveness is that it subtly centers the other person. Even when people say, forgiveness is for you, the emotional focus often remains on them. What they did, whether they deserve forgiveness, whether they changed, whether you're being fair. Your inner world stays orbiting the same event, the same person, the same narrative. That's not freedom. That's a long-term energetic contract. And resentment grows not because you haven't forgiven enough, but because something inside you knows the story isn't complete. Because forgiveness, by itself, does not answer deeper questions like, where did I abandon myself? Where did I stay silent when I needed to speak? Where did my boundaries collapse? What part of me learned it wasn't safe to fully show up? Forgiveness skips straight to resolution, without metabolizing the meaning. And whatever is not metabolized becomes stored tension. That's why people say things like, I forgave them years ago, but I don't know why this still affects me. It's because the emotional energy was never reclaimed. It was suppressed, spiritualized, or buried under the idea of being over it. But your system is smarter than slogans. It keeps score not out of spite, but out of self-protection. So here's the reframe that changes everything. Healing is not about letting go of the past. It's about retrieving what the past is still holding hostage. Your attention, your confidence, your emotional availability, your creativity, your sense of safety. Forgiveness might come later, or it might not. And that's okay, because the goal is not to become morally pure. The goal is to become energetically whole. And that begins when you stop asking, why can't I forgive? And start asking, what is this unresolved experience still costing me today? That's where real work begins. If forgiveness is not the starting point, then awareness is. Because before you can reclaim your energy, you have to know where it's trapped. Most people think their grievances live in the past. They say things like, that happened years ago, or I don't even think about it anymore. But that's rarely true. Grievances don't disappear just because time passes. They change shape. They move underground. They turn into patterns. They express themselves indirectly. They show up as emotional fatigue with no clear cause, sudden irritation in specific situations, overthinking conversations that haven't even happened, avoiding certain people, opportunities, or risks, feeling smaller, guarded, or tight in moments that should feel open. This is why we don't start by asking, "What happened to me?" We start by asking, "Where is my energy leaking right now?" Because grievances don't drain you where they began. They drain you where they're still active. Think of your inner world like a landscape. Some areas are open, alive, flowing. Others are tense, heavy, overgrown. Those heavy areas are not random. They're anchored to moments where something meaningful was disrupted. A betrayal, a humiliation, an abandonment, a boundary violation. A moment where your voice was ignored or punished. And instead of fully processing that moment, your system adapted. It learned how to brace, how to anticipate, how to protect. That adaptation once kept you safe, but now it's costing you energy. Here's where people often get stuck. They think mapping grievances means reliving the story. It doesn't. We're not interested in replaying scenes or assigning blame. We're interested in tracking sensations, reactions, and patterns, because your body already knows where the unresolved material is. You just haven't learned how to listen without judgment. So let's slow this down. Notice where your mood shifts unexpectedly. You're fine, and then suddenly you're not. Something small triggers something big. That disproportionate reaction is not weakness. It's data. Notice where your creativity stalls, where you procrastinate not because you're lazy, but because starting feels strangely heavy. Notice where you over-explain yourself, or where you stay silent when you shouldn't, or where you feel the need to control outcomes too tightly. These are not personality flaws. They're energetic anchors, places where emotional energy got frozen at the moment of impact. Another powerful signal is resentment that doesn't feel dramatic. Just quiet, dule, persiste. Not rage, not hatred, just a low-level tension that never fully resolves. That's often where the most energy is locked up. And here's something important. Discomfort is not the enemy in this process. We've been conditioned to avoid it, numb it, or immediately reframe it. But discomfort is a compass. It points directly to where attention is needed. When something makes you uncomfortable to acknowledge, that's usually because it threatens an old survival strategy. Your system says, "Careful, this is familiar. This kept us safe once." But safety and vitality are not the same thing. You can be safe and drained. You can be protected and small. Mapping your grievance landscape means gently noticing where you tense up, where you pull back, where you armor yourself, where you disconnect without trying to fix anything yet. This step is about seeing clearly, not healing quickly. And clarity alone begins to release energy. Because when something moves from unconscious to conscious, it no longer controls you from the shadows. You're not trying to get rid of the grievance. You're learning its shape, its location, its influence. And here's the subtle but crucial shift. Instead of identifying as the wounded part, you start relating to it. You're no longer inside the grievance. You're standing next to it, observing. That alone weakens its grip. Because most of the energy drain doesn't come from the original event. It comes from the constant, unconscious management of its after effects. The vigilance, the self-monitoring, the emotional buffering. Once you see that clearly, something changes. You realize, this isn't who I am. This is something I've been carrying. And what can be carried can also be set down, but not all at once, not forcefully, through attention, through precision, through learning how your inner world actually works, instead of following scripts that were never designed for your nervous system. Mapping your grievance landscape is not about judgment. It's about reclaiming agency. Because once you know where your energy is bound, you finally have a choice about what to do with it. And that's when the real transformation begins. Once you've mapped where your grievances live, the next question becomes unavoidable. What do you do with them? This is where most people either get stuck or fall back into old patterns. They either keep revisiting the pain, thinking insight will eventually exhaust it, or they try to transcend it prematurely, telling themselves they're above it now. Neither works, because unresolved grievances are not problems to be solved. They are energy to be metabolized. And metabolizing is a very different process than remembering or repressing. Think about how the body digests food. You don't relive the meal. You don't pretend you never ate it. You break it down, extract what's useful, and discard what isn't. Emotional experiences work the same way. A grievance becomes toxic not because it was painful, but because it was never fully digested. It stays frozen at the moment of impact. So every time you revisit it, you're not moving forward. You're stepping back into the same emotional posture. That's reliving. Alchemy begins when you stop entering the memory and start observing it from the present. This is a subtle shift, but it changes everything. You're no longer the version of yourself inside the event. You're the consciousness that can see the event. And from that position, something new becomes possible. Instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" you ask, "What capacity was forged here?" Not what lesson you should have learned, not what silver lining sounds acceptable, but what strength actually emerged, often unconsciously. Because pain doesn't just damage, it also sharpens. It teaches discernment. It clarifies boundaries. It deepens perception. The issue is that most of us never claim those capacities consciously. They stay tied to the wound. So the power exists, but it's locked. Alchemy is the process of separating the raw energy from the old narrative. The narrative says, "I was wronged. I was powerless. I didn't deserve that." Those statements may be true, but if they remain the primary identity, they keep you frozen. The energy beneath them, however, is neutral. Anger is not evil. Sadness is not weakness. Grief is not stagnation. They are signals, compressed life force, and when they're met without judgment, they transform. Here's where people misunderstand this process. They think transformation means feeling better. It doesn't, at least not at first. It means feeling more present. You learn to notice sensations without amplifying them. You let the memory pass through awareness instead of pulling you inside it. This is observing without reliving, and it takes practice. You'll notice your system wanting to dramatize, justify, or suppress. That's normal. The work is not to stop that impulse, but to see it happening. Each time you stay present, the emotional charge loosens, because energy wants to move. What keeps it stuck is resistance or obsession. Observation allows circulation, and once energy starts moving, something surprising happens. You feel more capacity, more groundedness, more clarity, more choice. You begin to sense that the grievance is no longer something that defines you. It becomes something that informed you. This is the moment where victimhood quietly dissolves. Not through denial, but through integration. You're no longer trying to prove that what happened was wrong. You already know that. You're no longer trying to extract an apology from the past. You're extracting power. And power doesn't come from domination. It comes from ownership. Ownership of your responses, your energy, your direction. One of the clearest signs that alchemy is happening is this. The story loses its emotional urgency. You can remember it without contraction. You can reference it without charge, not because you don't care, but because it no longer needs to protect you. And here's the paradox. When you metabolize a grievance fully, forgiveness often becomes irrelevant, not impossible, just unnecessary, because you're no longer bound to the event energetically. Forgiveness was trying to do that symbolically. Alchemy does it somatically. The power that was once tied up in pain becomes available for action, for creativity, for boundaries, for self-respect, for decisiones. You stop reacting from old wounds and start responding from present strength. This is not about becoming invulnerable. It's about becoming fluid. Pain doesn't harden you anymore. It informs you. And when pain informs rather than controls, it becomes wisdom. That's the alchemy. Not turning suffering into positivity, but turning it into capacity. And once you've done that, the next step is learning how to protect and direct that reclaimed energy, which is where we go next. At a certain point in this process, you begin to notice something unfamiliar. You're not calmer in a dramatic way. You're not suddenly healed. You're not floating above life. Instead, there's a quiet steadiness, a sense that your inner world is no longer being pulled in 10 different directions at once. That steadiness is the first sign that you're reclaiming sovereignty. Because sovereignty isn't about domination, confidence, or emotional invincibility. It's about who gets access to your inner resources. For most of us, the past still has open access. Old moments interrupt the present without permission. Old emotions override current intentions. Old identities speak louder than who we are now. Not because we choose that, but because no one ever showed us how to close the door. Reclaiming your energy starts with recognizing this. You don't lose energy only through pain. You lose energy through unconscious engagement. Every time you mentally rehearse an old argument, every time you justify yourself to someone who isn't there, every time you replay a memory hoping it will finally resolve itself, that's energy leaving the present. Sovereignty begins when you stop treating these inner movements as obligations. A thought appears, you don't have to follow it. An emotion arises, you don't have to obey it. A memory surfaces, you don't have to enter it. You acknowledge without submitting. This is not suppression. It's discernment. Most people confuse emotional maturity with emotional compliance. They think being healthy means feeling everything fully, all the time. But wisdom knows when to engage and when to conserve. Your system does not need to process every signal immediately. Sometimes, the most powerful response is containment. Another shift happens here that's subtle but essential. You stop organizing your life around reactions and start organizing it around intentions. Instead of asking, how do I avoid feeling triggered? You ask, what am I choosing to build with my energy? This changes everything, because emotions stop being obstacles and start becoming raw material. Anger becomes momentum. Sadness becomes depth. Disappointment becomes discernment. Nothing is wasted, but nothing is allowed to run the system unchecked. This is how you stop living defensively. Defensive living is when your present is shaped by what you're trying not to feel. Sovereign living is when your present is shaped by what you're intentionally moving toward. Another core element of sovereignty is temporal clarity. You begin to recognize when you are actually here, and when your nervous system has time traveled, the body doesn't know the difference between memory and immediacy. So when you react as if the past is happening again, your system pays the same energetic cost. Reclaiming energy means gently but consistently orienting yourself back to now. Not by force, by recognition. This is a memory. This is not happening right now. This emotion belongs to another time. Over time, this creates trust within your system. It learns that it doesn't have to stay on high alert. That vigilance can soften. That readiness doesn't have to mean tension. From this place, boundaries emerge naturally. Not rigid walls, clear edges. You don't need dramatic confrontations or explanations. You simply stop investing where there is no return. You stop chasing emotional reciprocity from unavailable sources. You stop negotiating your worth internally. Your no becomes quieter and stronger. This also changes how you relate to growth. You're no longer trying to heal in order to be acceptable. You're not performing awareness or proving evolution. You're simply aligned. Alignment is underrated. It doesn't look impressive, but it feels stable. And stability is what allows energy to accumulate rather than leak. One of the clearest markers of reclaimed sovereignty is how quickly you recover. Not how little you feel, but how little you spiral. You feel the emotion. You register the signal. You adjust. Then you return. That return is power, because it means your center is intact. And when your center is intact, life stops feeling like something that happens to you. It becomes something you participate in consciously. This doesn't make you immune to hurt, but it makes you resilient without being hardened. You remain open without being porous, available without being depleted. That balance is sovereignty in practice. And once that balance is established, the energy you once spent managing the past becomes free. Free to build, free to create, free to choose, which is exactly what the next phase is about. Learning how to live from this place without slipping back into old echoes. There comes a moment quiet, almost unnoticeable, when you realize something has shifted. The memory still exists. The story is still part of your life, but it no longer echoes. It doesn't reverberate through your choices. It doesn't hijack your attention. It doesn't define how you show up in the present. This is what it means to move beyond the echo. Most people don't suffer because of what happened to them. They suffer because their present is still being shaped by an unexamined past. Old grievances echo forward in subtle ways. How much trust you allow, how openly you love, how boldly you act, how much joy you permit yourself to feel. Living an empowered present doesn't mean erasing history. It means no longer outsourcing your identity to it. You stop defining yourself as the person who was hurt and start defining yourself as the person who responded. And this is where reclaimed energy begins to show itself. You feel more available, not just emotionally, existentially, available to engage deeply, take risks, create without constant self-censorship, relate without armor. Because when energy is no longer spent managing old wounds, it becomes available for life. This is often when relationships change, not because others suddenly behave better, but because you relate differently. You stop over-explaining. You stop tolerating subtle disrespect. You stop chasing emotional closure from people who can't offer it. And without forcing anything, your standards rise. Not from ego, from clarity. Work changes too. Creativity becomes less effortful. Focus becomes more natural. You act with intention instead of urgency, because urgency is often a symptom of unresolved emotional pressure. When that pressure dissolves, presence expands, and presence is power. One of the most profound shifts in this phase is how you experience time. You're no longer dragging the past behind you, or anxiously projecting into the future. You're here, responsive, attentive, alive, and from here, growth becomes sustainable. But this isn't a one-time achievement. Empowerment requires maintenance. This is where energetic hygiene comes in. Just like physical hygiene prevents illness, energetic hygiene prevents emotional buildup. It means regularly checking in with yourself and asking, where am I holding tension unnecessarily? What am I avoiding that needs a boundary? Where am I giving energy without intention? Small corrections, done consistently, prevent large grievances from forming. You don't wait until resentment hardens. You address misalignment early. You speak sooner. You rest when needed. You withdraw energy from what drains you without guilt. This is how you stop leaking energy over time. And here's the deeper liberation in all of this. You no longer need to be understood by the past. You don't need validation from the moment that hurt you. You don't need the story to resolve itself neatly. You've already reclaimed what mattered. Your agency, your direction, your vitality. This is what people often mistake for moving on. But it's not moving on. It's moving forward with integration. You carry your experiences as wisdom, not weight. And when someone asks you, how did you heal? The honest answer isn't, I forgave. It's, I stopped letting the past decide who I am allowed to be now. That's empowerment. Not loud, not dramatic, but deeply grounded. You don't announce it, you embody it. And from that place, forgiveness may come, or it may not. Either way, you're free, because your energy belongs to you again. And when your energy belongs to you, your life finally feels like it's moving in the right direction.